This photo claims to show the left engine from UPS Flight 2976, but it's fake, and it was made with AI by people looking to exploit this tragedy, and unfortunately it wasn't even the worst example that I found. So that's why I decided to investigate all of the rumors and AI content about UPS Flight 2976, including the most detailed theory that I've seen so far regarding why the plane crashed, and now I'm going to share with you the facts and expose the truth about all of it. I'm Hoover, and welcome to your pilot debrief. The dictionary defines a scam as a fraudulent or deceptive act or operation. And as an airline pilot and former fighter pilot, it just makes me sick when I see people trying to exploit the UPS tragedy for their own personal gain. And when I saw this photo, I originally thought there's no way people could believe this is real. And thankfully, most of the comments on the post were pointing out that it was AI, but that didn't stop over 800 people from liking the post. And the reason why that matters is because Facebook pays content creators based on how much engagement they get on a post. Now, that being said, most of you have seen this other image, which is the real photo of the left engine, the number 1 engine from UPS Flight 2976, and it was found in the grass on the right side of the runway, but we'll talk more about that later. For right now, let me just say that there are several others looking to exploit this tragedy, including this page that says the Kansas City Chiefs canceled their media schedule after a private pilot who was Patrick Mahomes' brother was on board UPS 2976 when it crashed. But as crazy as that might sound, when you look at all of the comments, a lot of the people seem to believe that it's true, while others argue that it wasn't his brother, it was actually his childhood friend. And when I started investigating this further, I ended up finding at least 2 more Facebook pages that try to look like they're associated with the Kansas City Chiefs, with links to articles claiming that Patrick's friend died in the crash. But the most shocking part about all of this is that when I tried to do a Google search to find out if it was true or not, AI told me it was real, providing references to AI Facebook posts as evidence. And for what it's worth, Patrick wasn't the only NFL player to be connected to this tragedy, because apparently Jordan Love left practice after learning his sister was among the passengers on the UPS cargo flight. Aaron Rodgers lost his brother in the crash, and also, I guess, Amon-Ra St. Brown from the Lions lost someone close to him in the tragedy as well. This is why you can't believe everything the AI tells you, and for those of you that don't know, UPS 2976 was a cargo flight, and it only had 3 pilots on board the aircraft: Captain Richard Wartenberg, First Officer Lee Truitt, and International Relief Officer Captain Dana Diamond. And my heart goes out to the family members and the friends that they left behind, as well as to the entire UPS community. I think it's also important to acknowledge that there were several casualties on the ground because of the crash, and I believe the total number of fatalities is up to 14 right now, but that includes the pilots. Either way, there's no reason that a private pilot or Patrick Mahomes' brother or any other NFL player's relative would be on that flight. And even though the photos of those athletes might be real, my guess is that there's an AI component behind these posts, and what I found next was even more disturbing. When it comes to the pilots that operated this flight, let me just say that I can't even imagine the suffering that their families are dealing with right now. And that's one of the reasons why I got really upset when I found this post on Facebook that said both of the black boxes from the flight have been recovered, and the pilot's last 3 words caused police to change the direction of their investigation. All right, first of all, the NTSB leads the investigation, not the police. But either way, at the risk of getting a virus on my computer, I wanted to investigate this further, so I clicked on the link to find out more. Which, by the way, is essentially the goal of a lot of these scams and misinformation. They're going to do whatever it takes to get you to click. But before I show you what I discovered, this is a real photo of the black boxes that the NTSB recovered from the crash. And so far, we know that the audio from the cockpit voice recorder was downloaded. But according to the link that I clicked on, this article claims that moments before the crash, the pilot said, "Check the left engine." Those 3 words changed everything, said a senior investigator who requested anonymity. Until that moment, we were focusing on the cargo area and external factors, but this directive immediately pointed us towards a potential mechanical or technical issue with the engine, something that had not been our primary focus before. Okay, I've got 3 problems with this. First of all, check the left engine is 4 words, not 3. Second, the people working for the NTSB don't anonymously leak investigation details. But third, and most importantly, it just doesn't make any sense. There is zero reason why the NTSB would be focused on the cargo area when all of the video evidence shows a huge fire on the left wing during takeoff. And what you need to understand is that the NTSB is very methodical when it comes to their investigation. They're not going to speculate. They're going to take their time and look at everything that possibly could have played a role in this crash. This is also where it's worth pointing out that the UPS aircraft that crashed was a 1991 McDonnell Douglas DC-10 that had been converted to an MD-11 freighter in 2006. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because back in the 1970s, there were 2 high-profile incidents involving the cargo door on the DC-10, which is perhaps the connection the article I just shared with you is trying to make. Now, the first one was in 1972 when the cargo door blew open in flight, causing damage to the flight controls and loss of the number 2 engine in the tail, but the crew landed safely a few minutes later. Tragically, though, in 1974, the cargo door blew open during another flight on another DC-10, this time Turkish Airlines Flight 981, but this time 6 passengers were ejected from the aircraft, and the plane crashed a few minutes later, killing all 335 passengers and 11 crew members. That being said, there's no evidence to suggest that the cargo door had anything to do with this tragedy. Now, my guess is that the article wanted to try and make their theory more believable, so it went on to say that the flight data recorder corroborated the pilot's concern, showing unusual readings in the left engine's performance metrics, including fluctuating pressure and temperature spikes in the seconds leading up to the catastrophic failure. However, the truth is at this point, the NTSB hasn't released any details from the flight data recorder, and all they've said is that the aircraft ADS-B data indicated a GPS altitude of 475 feet, which they said is about 100 feet above the ground, but some have argued that the field elevation at the departure end of the runway is only 461 feet, so the 475 feet is possibly the MSL altitude, suggesting they only got about 15 feet above the ground. But either way, you just have to remember that the NTSB still has to validate all of that with the flight data recorder, which is going to take a few days, so we don't know for certain. I also want to clarify that when it comes to what was said in the cockpit, we're never going to hear that. Nobody's heard that audio yet, except for select members of the NTSB, and they don't release the actual audio. But the recording that they downloaded is about 2 hours, and this is what they've said about it so far.
In reviewing that audio, the crew completed their standard checklists and briefings in preparation for the flight. The takeoff roll was what we called uneventful through the different speed callouts.
Now, when it comes to speed callouts, you've probably heard people talking about V1 and VR. And V1 is the speed at which it's no longer safe to stop in the remaining runway available, so you're going to take off even if you have an engine fire after V1. In fact, a lot of aircraft will call out V1 for you at your V1 speed, but then the pilot monitoring will call out rotate when you get to VR, your rotation speed. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it sounds like whatever happened, it possibly happened after they rotated. Otherwise, I think the NTSB wouldn't have said that the takeoff roll was uneventful through the different speed callouts. Additionally, the NTSB said that a repeating bell, which is kind of like a warning bell, sounded in the cockpit starting about 37 seconds after takeoff thrust was applied, and it continued for approximately 25 seconds until the end of the recording, which was most likely the moment of impact. At this point, it's assumed that the bell was associated with the fire on the left engine, but chances are there were multiple warnings going off at the same time. Either way, something terrible happened, and that brings us to the point where we need to talk about the videos and images of the crash, and then I'm going to explain one of the most detailed theories that I found about why the plane crashed. Before we get to the next part, I want to take a second to explain another way that people are being exploited online right now. You see, if you've ever searched your name online, you might have noticed that there are often dozens of websites that already know your phone number, your address, even your relatives' names. That's coming from data brokers. These are companies that legally collect your personal information, then they sell it to anyone willing to pay for it. That's a huge problem because once your information is out there, you're at a higher risk for scams, phishing schemes, or even identity theft. But that's why I trust and use Delete Me, who just so happened to be the sponsor of this video. Their team of privacy experts searches through hundreds of these data broker sites to find your personal information, and then they work to get it removed, not just once, but continuously throughout the year. Since I signed up, Delete Me has reviewed over 25,000 listings and found 77 data brokers that have my information, like my name and address, but also the names of my family members. And they've worked to have that information removed, sending me regular reports showing exactly what they found, which gives me a huge peace of mind. So if you want to take control of your privacy, scan the QR code on the screen to get 20% off all consumer plans, or go to joindeleteme.com/debrief and use the code debrief at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/debrief, code debrief. And now let's get back to the video. When it comes to fake photos, there's been a lot of video and images taken of this tragedy, and when I was doing my research, I found this post by a source called Aviation Entertainment News, which I'm sure to the casual observer might seem pretty credible because you see some photos of a UPS plane crash, and there's also the photo of the engine that I shared with you earlier. But the thing is, 2 of these photos are from a UPS plane crash that happened in Birmingham, Alabama back in 2013 when Flight 1354, an Airbus A300, crashed just short of the runway while on final approach after the pilots descended below their minimum descent altitude even though they didn't have the runway in sight. And even though technically this isn't AI generated, my problem with it is that they're trying to exploit the current tragedy by presenting older images as if it's new information. And as you can see, it got 16,000 likes and was shared over 1,400 times, which could be making them a lot of money. By the way, when it comes to images of the crash site, the NTSB has provided this footage that they took with a drone of the area. And this footage, as well as all the photos that they take, will be included with the investigation docket that'll be released to the public at some point in the future. As of right now, we know that this video showing the aircraft taking off with what appears to be the left engine / left wing on fire is real. Also, I'm not going to show it because it's too graphic, but the footage taken from a dash cam showing the aircraft hitting some power lines moments before impact, and the footage of the aircraft rolling to the left and crashing are all authentic and they weren't made with AI. However, this is AI, and aside from the fact that somehow the plane crashed intact between the buildings, it doesn't even show an MD-11. And if you look up in the corner, at least they put an AI label on it, but it still got 10,000 likes. This is also AI, but at least with this one, the author put a disclaimer in the description that says AI-generated visuals used for educational and awareness purposes only. However, in the comments, he would go on to say that this image says it all. Now, I'm not sure why people feel the need to do that, but I guess they want to look like they're sharing a picture or maybe some information that no one else has shared. Either way, this brings me to a post that I really want to talk about because this was shared on a pilots group that I'm a part of, and it provides perhaps the most detailed argument about what might have caused the plane to crash. This is the post that I'm talking about, and because I found it on several pages, I'm not sure who the author is, but when you see a dramatic title like this talking about engineering elegance meeting catastrophic reality, and you throw in a few emojis, those are all classic signs that this was probably written by AI, but let's take a closer look at this theory. The author starts by saying that this is a vulnerability that keeps aviation engineers awake at night. And honestly, I doubt that's the case because they're talking about the technical diagrams of the MD-11. However, perhaps there's at least a few people that like to scroll through those for some light reading, but the big claim here is that the fuel supply to the rear engine, which is the number 2 engine, well, it runs right next to the number 1 engine, and then you have the dramatic line, understanding the beast. All right, I'm not going to bore you by reading the entire post, but what's interesting is that the author included this diagram that allegedly is a schematic of the MD-11 fuel system. Now, I've never flown the MD-11 and I don't have the manuals or the schematics for it, so I can't confirm it, but it does look real. And the truth is, I was able to find the same image on a website called aircraftinvestigation.info, which is a little bit better resolution. And if you look closely, you can see the green lines, which appear to be the fuel lines for the APU and the number 2 engine in the tail. And it looks like they're pretty close to the red lines, which represent the fuel lines for the left engine. The author goes on to say, think of it like this. Imagine your heart's main artery running right next to a chainsaw. Now imagine that chainsaw occasionally explodes. That's the MD-11's fuel supply situation in a nutshell. And of course, he had to add an explosion emoji in case you didn't get the picture. Okay, this is where it's important to understand that the engines on UPS Flight 2976 were part of the GE CF6 family of engines, which has had a history of uncontained engine failures. However, 4 of the most recent incidents were between 2008 and 2010, and they were all on overseas aircraft, and they were also on the Dash 45/50 series of engines, which are the older engines, whereas UPS Flight 2976 had the Dash 80 C2 series of engines, which are also found on some Boeing 747s and the 767, as well as the Airbus A300 and A310, and also it's found on some military wide-body aircraft. And even though the FAA has issued an emergency airworthiness directive effectively grounding all MD-11s, they only said it was because the left-hand engine and pylon detached during takeoff, and the cause is under investigation, but this unsafe condition is likely to exist or develop in other MD-11 aircraft. However, to be clear, this doesn't apply to any other aircraft using CF6 engines. So to me, that sounds like it's more of a concern with the MD-11 rather than the threat of the engine potentially exploding. Otherwise, this would apply to any aircraft with those kind of engines. So if we go back to the theory, the author says that if the number 1 engine detaches, the damage could easily sever the fuel lines running nearby, which would lead to what's described as the domino effect from hell, where the number 2 engine in the tail essentially loses its fuel supply and flames out. Also, I just want to point out that when you have an exact timeline of sequence of events like this, it's another indication that AI wrote this. And just to show you another example of that, people thought that this was the timeline of Air India Flight 171 that crashed earlier this year, but it turned out that this was entirely made up by AI. Now, I realize some people are going to argue that it's entirely possible that when the engine and the pylon came off the airplane, that it severed the fuel lines. And they're going to say that something like this has happened before. But the incident they're referring to happened in 1979 when American Airlines Flight 191, a DC-10 aircraft, had the left engine and pylon break off the aircraft during takeoff, and the plane crashed about 30 seconds later, killing 271 people on board and 2 people on the ground in what would turn out to be the deadliest single aircraft aviation accident in U.S. history. However, the truth is there was no engine fire or explosion in that tragedy, and it turned out to be fatigue cracking where the pylon connected to the wing that got worse over time, and that was all caused by improper maintenance procedures. And even though the separation ripped out the hydraulic lines that led to the pilots losing control of the aircraft, it didn't do anything to the fuel lines for the number 2 engine. Now, the reason why you need to know that is because now you can see how this theory is essentially trying to draw parallels to other tragedies to give it more credibility. In fact, the author went on to write literally another 1,000 words trying to explain the history of the MD-11 and what happens when you lose an engine on takeoff, and how it's obviously worse when you lose 2 engines. Now, in full transparency, when it comes to UPS Flight 2976, there's been a lot of speculation about the possibility that the number 2 engine in the tail suffered a compressor stall, possibly because of some of the metal and debris from the left wing or the left engine and pylon assembly. And if you look at this frame from the video of the takeoff, some are arguing that this flash of light is that compressor stall in the number 2 engine, but the NTSB hasn't said anything about this yet. I also want to clarify that it has been confirmed that the aircraft was on the ground in San Antonio, Texas from September 3rd until October 18th for what's being described by the NTSB as a heavy check maintenance event. It's not clear what maintenance was performed during that 6-week period, and I'm not going to speculate, but what I do know is that the NTSB is going to look at the complete maintenance history of the aircraft, not just the records from the time it was in San Antonio. Regardless, when it comes to the theory about the fuel lines being cut by an exploding engine, you have to remember that this picture is not an engineering schematic showing you the precise location of the fuel lines. It's meant to be a simplified drawing of the fuel system to help people understand how fuel gets to the engines. And to top it all off, when I asked ChatGPT what are the chances that this article was written by AI, it said that the odds were greater than 90%. Now, I'll admit that there's always a possibility that there's some truth to this theory, but so far there's been nothing to confirm it, and that's why we need to wait for the NTSB to finish their investigation, even if that takes time. However, based on what I've seen and what the NTSB has said so far, the pilots did everything they possibly could do to maintain control of the aircraft, but sometimes it's impossible to overcome the physics of the situation. And we also have to remember that the families of the victims are still grieving over this. So let's pause for a minute and let the experts do their job and stop clicking on AI-generated images and articles claiming to know the real reason why the plane crashed. In the meantime, I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for your support, and I'll see you on the next Pilot Debrief. Thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. To start removing your personal data from hundreds of data broker sites, use my link in the description and get 20% off.